We're in this series called Church Embodied, and I want to frame the series briefly, knowing that some folks have kind of popped in and out, or maybe this is your first time here for this series. And then what I want to do is I'm going to dive into the deep end this morning. So if you're not awake yet and you haven't had your coffee, pinch yourself a lot because you're going to need it. Mostly because I'm not joking about the deep end, but I think there's some payoff on this one. So we're going to give it a shot. And if this is like the worst talk you've ever heard, write me angry emails. I'll write you back and say, thank you for the encouraging note, and we'll be done with it, okay? So here we go. We are in a series, as I've said, Church Embodied, Ancient Practices in the Way of Jesus. And we've been just kind of trying to frame, why do we do some of the things we do? Why do we think crosses are central? Why do we do the sign of the cross? Why do we have liturgy? Why do we kneel? Why do we pray? Why do we do a lot of these kinds of things? And why has the Christian tradition been about these things for so long? And we've rooted it in our core value, mystery. Ancient faith fosters wonder and refuses to put God in a box. Ancient faith fosters wonder and refuses to put God in a box because some of us have this idea that if we could just know enough about God, that we could figure out all of the answers to life's greatest mysteries and it's done. And then you just kind of follow the script and everything will be fine. Now, if you're someone who enjoys putting things together based on owner's manuals, that's a great approach, right? Like to have a Bible that's an owner's manual that kind of just guides you step by step by step. If you do this part, the next step of the journey is to do this thing, and then you're like, whoa, this is kind of like Legos, and I was pretty good at that, you know? And so you're kind of maybe spiritually into building Lego fortresses. Maybe you really like, your Star Wars Legos, and you feel like, the Christian journey can kind of be like that. Like if I can just put the right pieces in the right places and I get a really big kind of, I don't know what they call those platforms in Legoland, but those things that you stick the things to, it'll fit, it'll put itself together, and magically I end up doing a very good job of being spiritual. And many of us maybe understand that in other ways. Like you felt maybe that approach was wrong, but other people maybe tried to invite you into that posture. And we're just kind of stuck. Like, what about all of those people who don't like owner's manuals? Like, for instance, me. Anything that has to be put together, I've just kind of vowed that I'm never going to do it again. Can I be honest with you for a minute here? Yeah. So, I literally have vowed I am not going to ever use an owner's manual again. I'm never going to put something together again unless there's, really smart people telling me what to do. Because as soon as I pull out that book, it's like, dude, this is too much. This is too stressful. This is too overwhelming. And we've done that with Scripture. We've done that with the Christian faith so often that we finally get to a point where we're like, you know what? I can't figure this out. It doesn't make sense to me. The Legos aren't lining up how I thought they would. And we either just toss out the book and just forget about it, or we realize that was never the point in the first place. And that mystery sometimes is a good thing, especially when it comes to how we are designed as human beings. And so that's been kind of the foundational posture of this series, that we admit that we can't figure it out, but what we do know is that there's this big kind of spanning tradition that we've been invited and grafted into the storyline. And now we're all actors with a part to play. Now, the quote of the series, as I called it last week, we'll continue calling it that because I don't know what else to call it. And we've used it now. This will be week 7. I've quoted this quote. So I kind of feel like if I got rid of it, I would be, disingenuous to the series. So I'm just going to read it. Some of you have heard it so many times it's memorized, and that's good because it's a good quote. But here we go. The story of Christianity moves from a focus on mystery in the classical period to institution in the medieval era, to individualism in the Reformation era, to reason in the modern era, and now in the postmodern era, back to mystery. And that is the reality we find ourselves in now. Now, I say this almost every week, that we are not glorifying postmodern philosophy. We are simply saying something about the cultural shift has reminded many of us who are of faith that God cannot be contained in our reasonable packages. And that's good news. It's such good news. Now, from the earliest days of Christian faith, there's been this thing called worship. Now, worship is this really kind of interesting word because sometimes we find ourselves slipping and saying, hey, for the next few moments, we're going to worship. And then Brett gets up there and plays on the guitar, and he's doing his thing. We're like, yes, worship music, therefore, that's what worship is. And sometimes worship becomes this kind of thing where maybe you've seen music done poorly, and you've thought to yourself, I don't want to be a part of that. There's like happy singers on the stage, and they're smiling way too big, and you're just like, come on, it's just not me, and maybe you've just kind of had this feeling in the past that when I think of worship initially, I think of something that feels a little weirdly contrived, sometimes manipulative in some settings. But in the earliest parts of our faith, in the first century and forward, until we get to this guy named Constantine. We talked about that last week. If you want to know more about what I'm talking about, go back there. But in the earliest centuries of the Christian church, worship was a form of resistance. It was resistance. Now, it wasn't solely resistance. Worship wasn't just because I need to resist the things around me, so I'm going to use worship as a prop to do that. That would be really backwards. It's actually the opposite. It's because God is the king of the universe, I can't but worship this God who has loved me before I ever loved that God back, and who invites me to live a better story. That is resistance. And so, I want to take you into the throne room of heaven. We're going to be in the book of Revelation this morning. It's the only place we're going to be this morning. And I realize some of you who haven't been around here very much are probably already thinking, Revelations, I don't like that. It's not my deal. I get it. Especially if you're used to the big time charts. Anyone? Yeah, really, really big, and there's complicated, and there's scary drawings, and then this beast comes out at this point in the timeline, and then there's all of this apocalyptic stuff, and then the earth blows up to smithereens, there's blood moons, and books about blood moons, and there's billboards about, rapture happening, there's all this stuff, and you're just like, why do we even need to go there? I'm a pan-millennialist, it'll all pan out in the end. It's a healthy corrective to some of the theology that floats around there, but it's a cop-out. Can I be real with you for a moment? It is a cop-out because the book of Revelation is so much better than ignoring it and dismissing it and saying it's good, it'll figure itself out. That is a cop-out. The problem is a lot of folks don't have the resources and tools to move beyond that cop-out approach. And so if you're a cop-out Christian when it comes to Revelation, I don't blame you. I'm not mocking you. I'm just saying you don't have to be after today. So let's jump in. Let's see what's going on. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 5. We're going to unpack a bunch of crazy stuff, and I'm going to try and do all of that in 25 to 28 minutes. Let's do it. Here we go. Revelation 5 says this. Then I saw a scroll in the right hand of the one seated on the throne. It had writing on the front and the back, and it was sealed with 7 seals. I saw a powerful angel who proclaimed in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or look inside it. Verse 4. So I began to weep and weep because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look inside it. Then one of the elders said to me, "Don't weep. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has emerged victorious so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Let's stop there for a second. So what you haven't seen in the scene is that in chapter 4, we're introduced to these like elders, right? These figures. We think metaphorically, 12 of them might be the apostles. It really doesn't matter for our purposes today, but there are these 24 elders, and you may remember the old Chris Tomlin song, right? We fall down, lay our crowns at the feet of Jesus, greatness of mercy and love at the feet of Jesus, singing holy, 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 right? Yeah, so that's that scene. That's what that's about. And in chapter 4, you get that beautiful imagery of these 24 elders. You get these angelic creatures that are worshiping God. You basically have entered into, like if we could pull back the curtain behind us and heaven was simply on the other side, or if we were to open the wardrobe for a minute and just kind of glimpse into what the other side has to offer, that is what John is trying to show us in 4 and 5. And he has said, now listen to this. So one of the elders says this thing, right? He says, look, don't worry about it. Don't weep. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is victorious. This is what he hears. Notice it's audible. I want to keep going. Verse 6. Then, in between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw. So I heard there was a Lion of Judah, but what I see seems to be different than that. So I saw a lamb standing as if it had been slain. It had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are God's 7 spirits sent out into the whole earth. He came forward and took the scroll from the right hand of the one seated on the throne. When he took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each held a harp and gold bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They took up a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals, because you were slain, and by your blood you purchased for God's persons from every tribe, language, people, and nation. You made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will rule on the earth." Then I looked, and I heard a sound of many angels surrounding the throne, the living creatures and the elders. They numbered in the millions, thousands upon thousands. They said in a loud voice, "Worthy is the slaughtered lamb to receive power, wealth, wisdom, and might, and honor, glory, and blessing." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the sea. And in the sea I heard everything everywhere say, "Blessing, honor, glory, and power belong to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb forever and always." Then the 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. Revelation is a book that we loosely, not even loosely, like pretty seriously categorize as apocalyptic. Now, apocalyptic is a fancy word for a bunch of wild imagery that the imagery isn't really the point. It's the thing the imagery points to that's the point. You tracking so far? So it's kind of like when you tell a story, but really the story isn't true. It's almost like a parable in a sense, right? Like you're telling a story, but at the end of the story, there's this amazing like moral or idea that pops out of nowhere. And you're like, oh, that's really what it's about. This was just getting us to that. It's sort of the same way with Revelation throughout it. And it's saturated with imagery, saturated with confusion. There's weird stuff, there's violent stuff, there's beautiful stuff, there's all kinds of stuff. And most of it is not meant to be taken very literally. Some of it, however, could be. So I want to make a few observations, because if we don't have a gauge, a shared kind of understanding of what Revelation is, then when we get to the point of today's talk, it's going to be like, but what about but what about? And so I want to give you just some foundational sort of statements about Revelation. Look, I wish we could do a series. We will actually probably in the next year where we frame out the entire book and what it's about, maybe over 3 or 4 weeks. We really go at it. But today, I'm just going to ask you to at least enter into a trust exercise with me that these very definitive statements that you're going to see on the screen at least have evidence to back them up, even if you're not sure if they're really true. Fair enough? Okay? So, first one, Revelation is less about the future and more about the past and the present. Okay? Tracking so far. So, Revelation is not about what's going to happen at the end of history, at least most of it. If you get to parts of 20, and especially 21 and 22, John eventually has this image of a renewed heaven and renewed earth, right? And it's this beautiful, picturesque kind of place. It's where heaven comes down and intersects with the earth. And this is what we often call in the Christian tradition the new creation, the renewed creation, heaven and earth joined as one. The ultimate point of the Christian story is that heaven and earth become the same place. With that caveat, the rest of the book is addressing real things. And why wouldn't it be addressing real things in a real time? Think about Paul's letters. How often do you read Paul's letters and think to yourself, wow, this must all be about the future? And they're talking about, when you speak in tongues, right? And we never go there. We just don't. We read a letter from Paul and we say, in the first century, the people receiving this letter probably received it and said to themselves, this is relevant to here, now, today. Oh, important. Better try to apply this with Legos. No, don't do that. And so that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, that this is also a letter. It's just a letter encrypted with a bunch of chaos and weirdness for us. And we have to kind of get past that to remember, no, this is a real letter that was written to 7 churches. Here's another big idea. There is a crystal ball method versus a discipleship manual method. Do we read Revelation and think to ourselves, we shake it up and we watch the news and we watch those really fancy preachers who say, I saw on the news and I saw in Jerusalem and then I saw that they were making a new Ark of the Covenant. Boom, the rapture is here in 3 days. I realized that last week I told you that the rapture was going to be here in 3 days, but my calculation was a little off because, I forgot that in the book of Daniel, there's another 7 verses 7 verses 7, and when you times them all together, it's actually more like 3 years. So I have a new date for you, but it's a good one. Repent and pay me some coin. Here's the website link, and I'll send you some holy water that I bless personally that you can drink when the apocalypse comes so you get raptured into the sky. Man, I should have been one of those preachers. I could probably sell that, right? Kind of selling popsicles to Eskimos. You could sell that. So anyway, that's not... Where am I going with that? That's the crystal ball method, right? Right? But then there's the discipleship manual method that says this was written to real people in a real place in real circumstances where chaos was their norm. And it seemed as though they needed some handles for how to live the way of Jesus in a new situation. And so discipleship manual. Discipleship is just simply a word. How do we follow the teacher? Let's go to the next one. Weird images in Revelation aren't meant to be read literally. Rather, think of political cartoons. When you see a donkey, you think Democrat. Yay. When you see an elephant, you think Donald Trump. Okay. So we know how these images work intuitively, even though maybe we don't always see that when we read Revelation, because these are weird political cartoons. What are dragons doing there? Are there really dragons? Whoa, at least in the end, apparently God creates dragons and they come back and there's a boy flying on them. Oh, no, that's a movie. Okay, so dragons are not necessarily literal dragons, although that'd be cool because dragons do this, right? So, okay. Next one. At the end of the day, the primary message of Revelation is clear. The revelation of Jesus Christ. That's how it opens. And this is a book that is saturated with imagery to talk about the way in which Jesus deals with evil in the world, especially in the world of John and his hearers in the Roman Empire. Here's the churches that it's written to really quick here. We're going to run through some of this a little bit quick. He's at Patmos. You may remember the story, right? So John is at Patmos. And, of course, there's Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. These are all churches that are written to. It's a circular letter that is supposed to go to all of these places. And what we know about this region is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. For instance, there's several gods that are worshipped in this region. So one of these gods is Pax, the god of peace, right? Pax means peace. And here's a great little quote that kind of frames it for us. The Pax Romana, so that's the banner under which Rome just kind of continued expanding. The Pax Romana was achieved by a combination of strong military and political policies that focused on the unification of the provinces through cultural acceptance, incorporation, promise of security, reciprocity, and rewards. Has anyone ever lived in a country that did some of that? Not my country, but maybe yours. Okay, and this is the Pax Romana. This is the dream, right? Like the dream is that even though we were conquered a few generations ago, and my grandpa's grandpa was slain by Romans, we like them now because they build us roads. And we also don't want to die if we rebel. And so usually rebellions don't happen, although we know of one that was pretty traumatic. Nike. I'm not wearing Nikes right now, but when I work out twice a year, I have Nikes. And I wear these shoes, and they have this stripe. And now the stripe is literally a wing. So when the designer created this, right, so those of you who are into design and stuff, the swoosh is actually based on an abstract concept of a wing, because this is a wing-a-ling goddess called Victoria. Nike is the Greek, Victoria, or victory, the other term, right? Yeah. So we've got to kind of understand. So when you hear victory in a couple of passages, what are you going to think to yourself? The writer might have a point. Just kind of hold that. Roma was the female embodiment of the glorious empire. She was pretty. So Pax, peace has come through strength. Nike, we won! Woo, victory, right? And then you have Roma. Rome is beautiful like I am beautiful. You should worship me, right? So that's kind of, and what we find out in Revelation chapter 17 is that Roma gets called a whore. Anyway, bad word, but that's how it is. That's what it says. Harlot, other mean words, right? Roma is featured in the book as well. Now, the emperor at this time is worshipped as a god from the time of Caesar Augustus, especially in this particular region. This region that we saw, you don't have to put up the map, but you remember the map, that is called Asia Minor. And when Augustus conquers and wins the Civil War, it's Asia Minor who say, we think worshiping Augustus might be a good idea. We'll talk more about that. But here's Richard Bauckham. So if you ever want to get academic, by the way, on the book of Revelation, like some of you in here are like nerdy, like really nerdy, like nerdier than me, definitely. No, probably not. But at least not in the way that I'm socially awkward, but maybe smarter. Yes, you are smarter. So Richard Bauckham has this quote, and I want to read it to you. It says, the Roman Empire, like most political powers in the ancient world, represented and propagated its power in religious terms. Its state religion, featuring the worship both of the deified emperors and of the traditional gods of Rome, expressed political loyalty through religious worship. In this way, it absolutized its power, claiming for itself ultimate divine sovereignty over the world. Revelation itself allows no neutral perception. Either one shares Rome's own ideology, the view of the empire promoted by the Roman propaganda, or one sees it from the perspective of heaven, Revelation 4 and 5, which unmasks the pretensions of Rome. Revelation portrays the Roman Empire as a system of violent oppression founded on conquest and maintained by violence and oppression. It is a system both of political tyranny and economic exploitation. a primary question when we are confronted with the content of Revelation is, who ultimately gets to run the world? And who do we give our allegiance to in light of that? When we hear the creatures saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, right? Like these are liturgical rhythms, these are worship songs, these are whatever you need them to be that focuses your energy on Jesus. But these are counter liturgies, as we talked about a few weeks ago, to the forces of Rome that are trying to shape the people. This is resistance. And think about it. I'm going to pay my taxes, so I'm going to go burn this thing to the emperor. Oh, okay, I'll do that, right? I want to show I'm a patriot, so I'm going to go to the ceremonies and show I'm a patriot. Go do that. I'm going to say the pledge of a wrong century, but you get the idea. These are all worship practices, and we may not call it worship. We may just call it tradition. We may just call it respect. We may just call it honor, but they are worship practices designed to take parts of our brain, parts of our imagination, and shape us into a particular kind of person so that our allegiance is at least divided, if not completely moving towards the system that wants to capture that imagination. What about these crazy people like dragons and beasts? You remember these? Yeah? Some of you? Like, maybe you remember the Left Behind books, like they come back at some point in the future and they preach and stuff, and one's a religious leader, and yeah. So they're sort of right, but sort of wrong. And so there's a dragon. I think they were right about that. The dragon is the image for Satan, right? And identified as the old snake who is called the devil and Satan is the power behind the throne and its imperial power to conquer the world with the sword of Pax Romana, right? So Satan is the energy force. This dragon is the one who gives away the power to this sea beast and this earth beast. Can we keep tracking? Some of you are like, dude, I've never even heard of these terms. It's okay. We'll just kind of fast forward 3 minutes into the talk and it won't even be that relevant. Well, maybe it will, but you'll catch on. The sea beast is the military and political power behind the Roman emperors, right? So this is an image that represents the power structure of violence and militarism. And the earth beast promotes, in the words of Richard Bauckham, the imperial cult by setting up the image of the beast and giving it godlike characteristics. One beast is the incarnation of the emperors, whoever might be on the throne, and the power that comes through them. The other beast is like, look at how great that beast is. Let's have some practice and think about how great that beast is. You following? Right? So that's kind of, some have called this the Trinity, but like the demonic one. So in the book, this could easily be considered like a demonic trinity. Like these are the three negative forces of the book. So we get this passage in Revelation 13. They worshiped the dragon because it had given the beast its authority. They worshiped the beast and said, who is like the beast? And who can fight against it? It's unstoppable. It can't fall. There's no way it's going to fall down. It's invincible. And then it falls, according to this author. Like every empire, eventually falls. Okay, now I'm going to take you into Pergamum for a minute, and we're kind of on the back end of our journey through Revelation, and we're going to try and tie it together with a neat bow in the next several minutes. So if you're like, dude, is there a point here? Like, you're giving us a lot of context. Where are we going? Trust me. Well, you don't have to trust me, but I'll do my best to earn your trust by getting us there. Does that make sense? Okay, here we go. So these are the cities and how they break down and what happens as far as the practices of worship in the time of John. By the way, this is the 90s of the Common Era. This is during the reign of an emperor called Domitian. Domitian, by many, was considered the re-embodiment of another emperor, Nero. Nero suffered and died a tragic wounding death, but there was a myth during this time that Nero had been reborn. And so, if you've ever heard of the one with the head wound who came back to life, most commentators kind of feel like, that's probably a Nero image that mirrors this historical thing that was actually happening, where Nero is thought to have come back, even though it was just a myth. So, Pergamum. was the first city to adopt a specific cult to the royal family back in 29 BCE. They actually wrote a letter to Caesar Augustus, who at that time I think is still Octavian, and they wrote to him and said, hey, can we, set up a cult in your honor because, you beat the guy we were actually cheering for, and we want to show you that we're going to cheer for you now. So can we just set up a couple of temples and kind of make it obvious that we're into you, kind of a grand gesture? And he's like, well, I don't want people to think I'm arrogant or anything. So yes, you may, but make sure you worship Roma and Julius Caesar alongside me in Pergamum, and that'll make it okay. Right? So he allows them to set up this cultic system where the emperor is literally worshipped as a god on the earth, or as one poet puts it in 9 BCE, God manifest. The hope of all earlier times. Interesting, right? And in Pergamum, Ephesus, Smyrna, and Sardis, so all of these towns, there's an imperial temple, altar, and priest. In Thyatira, they didn't have a temple, maybe a little smaller town or something, but they had a priest. And Philadelphia boasted of everything but an additional altar. And Laodicea, although lacking a temple and a priest, maintained an imperial altar as well. Okay. In this system, the Roman gods become very central to propping up the emperor as well. So it's not just the emperor and the other two I mentioned. Nike is being worshipped. Pax is being worshipped. They're all kind of being worshipped as a package deal. And you could go to different altars to make sure you hit the different gods because you want them in your favor. Because if the gods are angry at you, you might get squashed or your crops might not grow, right? And so Nike is credited with destroying the Jewish people in 70 CE, and for 2 decades after this happens, the Roman Empire mints coins mocking the Jewish people. These are 2 examples there. Example number 1, there is a weeping woman, and there is on the left, and I'd love to get more into this, I've researched this a little bit, there's a soldier, and what you can't see in this picture is he actually has a sword, and it is an image of something that's not a sword. Okay? I'm not going to, I don't know where the children are, but you get it. And the image is meant to portray that Jerusalem is like a weak woman whom we raped and pillaged, and that's why they don't exist anymore. Don't mess with us. The same time, we get coins of victory with her wing-a-ling action and her awesome declarative mirror of goodness or whatever that is, shield. And so what we have during this time is the question, because many believe that several Jews migrate from Jerusalem in terror, maybe even taking Jesus' advice that you should flee Jerusalem when you see all of these chaotic things starting to happen. Go back and read Mark 13 as a reference point. And they end up in Asia Minor, and now they're in the midst of this situation where all of the gods are being worshipped, where Jewish people are trying to find their place after being conquered, and some of them have become Jesus people, and John seems to be one of them. And victory is all around. And we're left asking, does victory really get the last word? Or is there a better victory? Is there a better conqueror? Is there a better power source in the cosmos that defines us in a different kind of way? What if we worship that and refuse this? So the Lion of Judah or the slaughtered lamb? Did you catch that earlier? I tried to kind of draw this out. John sees the Lion of Judah because the elder says, hey, the Lion of Judah has conquered. Or he hears about this. But then what he sees is what the Greek would say, a baby little lamb that was slaughtered. Jesus is portrayed as a baby little lamb that was slaughtered. And Nike is nothing but powerful, godlike. And yet you have this baby slaughtered lamb who says, no, I'm actually on the throne of the universe. The emperor isn't on it. None of you gods are on it. It is the slaughtered lamb named Jesus. Can you see how provocative that is? And how using the language of victory in that context would have just busted up all kinds of questions. Justo Gonzalez says it this way. He says, power has been gained by means of self-surrender and even death. This victory, in contrasting it to the victories of armies and of lions, is a victory of love, of giving of self, of suffering. Undoubtedly, this image is presented to Christians in the suffering churches of Asia so that they may know that quite possibly through the very sufferings that seem to be a sign of defeat, they are achieving the greatest of victories. Like the Lamb, Christians must conquer by means of love and the giving of self. The one who is on the throne becomes the model for the one who wants to follow the one on the throne. That is the point. And so let me draw this all together for a few moments and see if something connects for us this morning. When we worship, we join the chorus of the heavens that will one day be the norm of the earth. One day, the chorus of heaven will be the norm of the earth when Jesus comes back and sorts it all out and says, no more systems, no more violence, no more injustice, no more hatred, no more bigotry, none of that. Even as a slaughtered baby lamb, I'm going to show you a better way. That seems to me to be very good news. When we worship God through Christ, we proclaim that there is no other person or system worthy of our allegiance. Nothing beats Jesus. Nothing is better. Nothing is worth giving your imagination to. The slaughtered lamb is the only imaginary yet real thing that you should be captured by. God looks like Jesus. So, who do you imagine when you worship? Who do you imagine when you worship? Like when you're in here and we're singing songs and we're like doing the liturgy thing, we're going to do the communion thing, we're going to do all the things. And as you're doing that, are you imagining that the throne of the universe is occupied by a slaughtered baby little lamb, Jesus himself, and that is the most definitive, beautiful picture of God that we could possibly have. Jesus is what God looks like. And when and what do you resist when you worship? Because if worship is about anything, it's about saying, I want to be changed by this God. I want to be transformed. I want to be part of an alternative kingdom, an alternative throne room. And that when I enter the presence of God, and by the way, I'm not talking here of like entering the presence of God in a way that we just kind of feel like it might be possible. But when we give our attention to this God is actually present with us. This God is actually real. This God sometimes can even be experienced in a way that goes beyond the mind, goes beyond kind of what we understand. It goes beyond the Legos and the blocks, goes into the mysterious parts of ourselves and says, I love you. Go love like lambs that have been slain for the good of the world. Revelation 12, and I'll close with this. They gained the victory over him, and him is the Satan, on account of the blood of the Lamb and the word of their witness. It is only when we can look at the realities around us and say, this is a counterfeit, this is a counterfeit, this is a counterfeit, this is a counterfeit, that we can then say, but we know what counterfeit doesn't have to be. We know what it actually looks like to be real and authentic and to be fully human. It looks like loving your enemies so much that you die for them. It looks like saying that I will take on the sacrifice. I will take on the pain. I will take on the suffering for the good of others. We may not have angel wings, but friends, we can experience true victory. Worship puts us in that realm. It transfers us from the reality of a broken world and puts us into the world as it ought to be. But a world as it ought to be requires sacrifice, love, and generosity, and pain, and tears, and all of that. But here's what comes out the other side if we are really tracking with the vision of Revelation: hope, beauty, a world as God intended it to be, the new creation, the beauty of a world where God is actually king of our lives, king of our church, king of our community, king of the global church, king of the trees, king of the flowers, king of the dirt, king of the things that want to be unjust, but he comes in and says, no, I'm done with that. Victory happens when we own that vision as our own. Victory happens when we say our words about Jesus are rooted in our experience of Jesus, a Jesus who dies for the very people who put him on a tree. Worship is resistance when we can capture a beautiful, loving God that goes that far to know us, to be with us, and to transform the cosmos.